So here I wanted to talk about form factors, and this is probably coming to the end of the motherboard things. But the form factors is one of the main things, I guess, that you need to consider before you start building a computer. And this is how big is my computer going to be effectively. Now, this is sorry about the size of this, but this is a pen here, so it's trying to give you some scale. That's a pen, and we've got several different types. There's 5 types there, but there is also another one called an extended ATX, which we'll go through in a second. So actually, the only difference really is that the physical size of it. So we would have an eATX there, which is the extended ATX motherboard. Now the eATX relative to the standard ATX one here, there's obvious differences. As you can see there, let me get a brighter color there. There is the RAM chips. So on an eATX, you would have probably the CPU there. You would usually have 4 slots for RAM either side there. 4, 4, 4. So obviously you can see it's physically bigger, right? This is a physical size. It's quite big. Whereas on the ATX one, you probably have something like this, just 4 on one side. So you would also then get the PCIe, the expansion slots. You would get sort of maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 of them on the eATX. It depends which kind of eATX you get, of course, but it's standardly, or you might only get sort of a few on these ones, about 6 altogether on an ATX, 6 or 7 altogether on an ATX. But the main difference, and these two are the main kind of the main desktop ones. If you're going to build a gaming PC or a PC in general, you probably look at an ATX. And if you wanted a really big gaming PC or a solid workstation, you'd need an eATX. You could also use a micro ATX. And again, this is a PC. You can still use it in a desktop. It will be smaller, so I'm going to draw it. Sorry, I'm going to draw it a bit of a smaller size here, but not much more smaller. You can see on this how much smaller it gets there. But the micro, as you can see, this one had something like 4 or 5 slots. So the standard ATX had 4 or 5 slots, and the micro had 2 slots. It's got 2 slots here. These are very old motherboards, by the way. These are not really what they look like anymore. These look 15 years old at least, probably. Or very basic motherboards kind of thing. So you would get the micro ATX would have maybe 2 slots there, which then means, okay, I could get as a RAM chip the actual physical things that go in. They're very small. They're like this, and they look like that when they're stood up inside these chips. They tend to come maximum in 16 gigabytes per one of these, right? So that means in this one, I can put 16 gigabytes, and in this one, I can put 16 gigabytes of RAM, which means this one has an entire 32 gigabyte maximum. This one probably has something like 128 gig maximum, and this one will have, depending on the motherboards nowadays, the eATXs, they have, say, 256. They have, or they could have 128, or they can have 512, or some of them, if they're the workstation ones, actually can have terabytes of RAM. 1 terabyte, that's an insane amount of RAM. Bear in mind, if you get a standard MacBook these days, even the latest MacBooks, the cheapest ones, they're usually around about 8 gig at the moment in, say, 2021, 2020 sort of thing. So 8 gig is the standard. 8 to 16 gig is the standard laptop type one you're looking at, effectively. So it gives you an idea of how big actually these are, right? That's an insane amount of RAM. Even this is an insane amount of RAM still. Maybe this will date the video, but 32 gig you'll see in a lot of desktops, to be honest. Now, when we get down to the Nano and the Mini and the micro. Well, the mini looks like it only has one slot, and actually the nano and the pico, they don't actually have any slots. So we're getting even smaller. We're getting a CPU here with one slot, and then we're just getting a motherboard, sorry, with an integrated CPU. You can't change this CPU. Maybe in this one you can. So let me clarify that these are the mini, the nano, and the pico ones. And in these ones and the pico ones, this could be something like a Raspberry Pi. So that could be something like a Pi or Arduinos and things like that. And Arduino, something like that. And these may be, I don't know, these are in all sorts. You can use them as desktops. You probably wouldn't use anything less than this in a desktop. That's because you really want to be choosing at least one RAM stick, and you want to be choosing what CPU you've got in there. But in reality, all of these here are more of the embedded systems. Embedded, told you. I know how to spell embedded, and my hand just writes whatever it wants to write. Embedded systems. So these embedded systems are effectively just saying, well, I'm on a washing machine, I'm on a specific IoT device. You don't need to change the chips. You don't need to change the CPUs here. This is the CPU. You don't really need to have loads of RAM, because that's not what you need it for. In fact, on this one here, it's got it's got a CPU, and it's got a little RAM stick here, but there's not an actual RAM stick, because the RAM sticks themselves in a desktop is probably half the size of this, right? In reality, it's half the size of a Raspberry Pi or something like that. So they don't have these 8 gig DDR4 RAMs, which we'll cover in the RAM section. But they actually have smaller sections. They have less ports, less expansion slots. You can do less on them. But still, even with a Raspberry Pi, these days you can have Wi-Fi. It's got sound cards. You can have expansion slots. So on the actual motherboard itself, this is a Raspberry Pi type thing. This is one of the Pico ones, a very, very small one. You'll probably have like some kind of, and we saw these connectors on the motherboard before, you'll probably have some kind of 8-pin, 12-pin, something like that connector where you would put a physical cable into, and that would actually connect to a different board. And maybe this board has got maybe this has got sound inputs and outputs in there. Sorry, it's not a very good 3D drawing, but maybe that's got audio in, audio out. Maybe it has I don't know, it could have another HDMI port, and it looks like a smiley face now. And it could have potentially a USB-C type thing. So I can expand these things, but inside there will be a chipset, just like there was on the motherboard. There'll be a CPU somewhere. There will be some RAM somewhere, and it looks like another smiley face again. And there will be some RAM somewhere, and there will be some graphics cardy type thing somewhere, and there will be some inputs. So this bit here, if I just expand out into this, would have looking face down. This bit would have the there you go, the HDMI port. It would have a few USB sockets, maybe. It would have an Ethernet port, and it would have potentially USB-C or a micro USB and a power outlet and a power inlet, etc., etc. So it does have other things. It has exactly, they all have exactly the same things. It's just in different amounts, right? We can expand some and we can contract some. Sometimes we don't need a huge amount. Just as an interesting power usage for one of these Pico things. So these Pico ones, they seem like they're very, very low powered and they haven't got much capability. But actually, you can upload a piece of hacking operating system on one of these and do some serious hacking, right? You can run this on Ubuntu. You can run Ubuntu nicely on one of these chips. It does run nicely. You can put them into your TV, and you can have a computer on your TV. It runs smoothly. It's quite nice. They are powerful machines still, but they're very small, the size of your palm and smaller almost, going back last picture here, remember this was a pen, and this is the size of the, sorry about the size of it, but this was the size of it, so it's very small relative to a pen. They're the kind of size of your hand sort of things.